Jay, we're back again with another episode thanks to our Dig Me Out Union on Patreon. You can help us make the next episode happen by joining us at dmounion.com or digmeoutunion.com. And Jay, this is a roundtable episode. Dun dun dun.
It's very round. It's not a triangle.
It's a square or rectangle, depending on how
round
you
those
have
corners of the square off, and
right.
You guys, it's round.
And this episode has been one that's been percolating for some time, for an extended period of time, you might say. And that is EPs of the 90s. And it just in general, I think talking about EPs, this sounds like a nerdy thing. Talking about EPs is going to be fascinating, Jay.
Well, I guess in 2022, I'm not even sure what the term EP even means anymore, if it's actually a thing, because
right,
very much referencing a physical format. So,
well, this was suggested by Darren, one of the Darrens, Daz, in our Discord, because we have if you join our Patreon, you get access to our Discord, and we have a board of directors section where people who are in our board of directors can suggest roundtables and 80s episodes, and they can make it into future podcasts. And guess what? It did. So we're going to have a roundtable. That means we got to have folks joining us, and that means joining us. Both have been here before. Rich, this is your second time. Richard Waterman, welcome back to the show.
Thank you, guys. Nice to be here again.
And also joining us, he was here recently, but he's back again to share some EP knowledge. Ian McIver, welcome.
Hello.
Hello. And gentlemen, EPs. Were the 90s the golden age of EPs? That's what we're going to talk about, because here's a fun fact. Maybe you guys knew this. Maybe you didn't. What was the first EP to go #1 on the Billboard chart? Does anybody know?
In the history of recorded music?
In the history of recorded music.
Oh,
Jay, you must know this.
I have no idea. Why would I know this?
Because it's Alice in Chains.
Is it really?
The
wow.
Jar of Flies EP made it to #1 on the Billboard chart in January of 1994. It was the first EP to ever chart #1.
No way. I was going to say Alice in Chains, to be honest, because that was the first one that I ever got. Yeah. I ever bought with my own money. Mm-hmm. And it was, so I can't believe it was #1 though.
Yep.
I was considering that too, but then I'm thinking okay, because EP is not a new format, and especially like when you're going into the 90s now. I mean, was this even released on vinyl? I mean, this was another 5-inch CD, similar to any albums. So,
yeah, right.
And
well,
who knows?
Here's some knowledge I'm going to drop. The first quote-unquote EP, which was just basically an extended single, was released in 1919 by Grey Gull Records. They were cut on 78 RPM discs. And throughout basically recorded music, there have been the in-between, not a single and not an album, but an EP. And these are actually quite popular in the 1950s with regards to artists such as Elvis, and releasing, what they would do is basically release multi-single sets. So you'd get like 4 or 5 singles that were popular at the time, and you didn't have to buy a whole album. And they would, this is the part that was crazy to me. They did these on 7 inches in a lot of times. They would just cut them at a speed where you could fit like 15 minutes on a side, which had to have been a horrible sounding EP to cut it that thin to be able to fit that much music.
Yeah, I've only got 2 that are like that. My collection. I mean, both
saying,
signals.
April 1954 was the first EP issued in UK.
Yep.
So thanks Google for that. By the way.
I own a couple of 4-song EP 7-inches, and basically the songs are about 2 minutes per side because it's like a punk split. It was a cheap way for 4 punk bands to put out something to pool their money. Pay the $500 to press. Back in the 1980s or whatever, to press a 4-inch single, and it sounds terrible. It doesn't sound good at all.
Yeah.
Especially on, maybe you have some really high end equipment that can suss out the frequencies, but mine is middle range and it's not as quite as.
Maybe we should let Willie Dillon listen to it and see what he thinks about the dynamic range on it.
There we go.
Oh yeah. But in the 70s and 80s, I guess you had a period there where vinyl, you had a physical disc that would represent singles were on 45s, EPs would be maybe
like
on a 7-inch or 10-inch.
They'd be on a 10-inch.
And then an album would be on a 12-inch. At least you had some reference point of like a physical thing to what the format was.
Or the also 12-inch would be 45 RPM, not 35.
Yeah, they would change the speed on a 12-inch.
Tim, you might know this.
Yes.
What is? So I've got this really good compilation of it's like a 4-disc, like 12-inch 80s compilation. 12-inch 80s grooves is called. So like, what is 12-inch?
Well, that's your average album size, right? So it is a 12-inch record, but they're cut differently in terms of speed. So your album is going to be cut at 33 1/3.
Right.
But your EP is going to be cut at 45.
Yeah.
Which is weird.
They're all extended versions of like
right.
Luther Vandross and D Train and Shaka Khan and etc.
And this also gets into the mini LP discussion.
Oh God.
Which is a offshoot of the EP. I know. You go down a rabbit hole with this stuff, and all of a sudden the earth is flat. Like, you don't understand like where the EP ends and begins, because of the fact that it can be it's depends on the time period as well. So in general, the EP is less than an album. Okay, so in the 90s, the average album was probably in the 50 to 60 minute range. So it means you could have like a 45-minute EP. But in the 70s...
Yeah. Some albums were like 38 minutes.
Exactly.
45 was pushing the amount that they could cut the grooves out to 33 1/3.
Yeah.
Yep.
Back in the 70s, you'd get 40 minutes, but then in the 80s and 90s, as technology somewhat improved, okay, they might both stretch it to 50 minutes.
So I think we'll find in our conversation here, by the time you get to the 90s, the term EP is very fuzzy what exactly that means.
Right.
Yeah. So I've got a couple of examples for that. So.
Yeah.
Right. Oh, yeah, definitely. So Billboard actually introduced a weekly EP chart in 1957 in the United States, and then in the UK, record retailers started a chart in 1960, followed by NME, Melody Maker, and some other ones added EP charts. The most proficient EP band of the 60s was the Beatles. They would do multiple versions of like albums and EPs and singles for all different parts of the world, different territories. So they often would do EPs for releases that were, because you gotta think, remember, the Beatles had a lot of non-album singles.
Yeah.
So they were often putting those in, making those EPs in different parts of the world, which is why they're one of the most collectible bands of all times, because they have so many versions of their releases.
Titles change for the Beatles. You got With the Beatles versus Meet the Beatles, depending on which side of the Atlantic you're on.
Exactly. So the next EP to go to number 1 was the Linkin Park and Jay-Z collaboration EP Collision Course, which came out in 2004. And then after that, the Glee TV series released EPs in 2010, 2 of them, and they both went to number 1.
Remember it well.
Big Glee fan.
No.
That first season's not bad. The first season's not bad. After that, it goes downhill. It became too aware of its popularity, and it lost its underdog status.
Yeah.
You know,
All
it's
that
like Coldplay. Like that first Coldplay EP, you're like, yeah, this is kind of good. And then Coldplay turned into whatever they are now, and you're like, this is terrible.
I've never heard it. What was that before the Yellow? Was that what was Parachutes? Was it?
Yeah, before the first album, there was an EP.
All right.
And it was mostly like acoustic strumming type stuff. Sounded like Fake Plastic Trees, that kind of thing.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. It was fine. So, what we've seen though is that in digital, EPs kind of disappeared. Like you didn't really need EPs. You could just release a single internet-wise. But I think we've seen over the last couple years, bands re-embracing the EP. A couple examples would be Miley Cyrus actually released one of her albums as 3 EPs.
100%.
And we saw that with Failure. On Failure's second reunion album, In the Future, blah, 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 blah. They released...
Just say all.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Go on, I dare you.
When the Pawn Strikes the King, blah, blah, blah. Whatever that is. They released 4 EPs for that. And that's not the only artist that's done that. A number of artists. Honestly, I've seen a lot of artists going to that now, releasing digital EPs. Like The Smile, the new band from Tom York and Johnny Greenwood. They released a series of EPs before the album came out.
Yeah.
So, but we're going to focus on the 90s because that's our time period.
It's become a bit of a marketing strategy too, I think, to kind of keep the band
put the feelers out. Put the
in news cycles.
Yeah, so like I've read a lot of stuff over the last couple of years where bands are like, especially with COVID, they're like, well, no one cares about albums anymore.
Yeah.
Let's just put like 3 songs out like as a feeler and see if it catches, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah.
That seems to be the way it's going.
Yeah.
Or you can stay in the cycle too. Like if you just release an album, you're going to get a couple of weeks of attention. But if you do like EPs every 6 months or 3 months, like you're just constantly in the dialogue.
Because people have got short attention spans now as well, haven't they? So
yeah.
And that's what some people are doing now with Spotify and everything as well, because it's like only a couple of tracks are going to attention. Let's release this EP. Our fans want other people do this, and then we've got 6 months later, we've got another EP in the canon, so to speak, and then put that out again. A couple of tracks to get attention and give us all the revenue.
It's been like that for at least 5 years though originally, but then I think even bigger bands are doing it now. Yeah. Even bigger bands are like, oh no, there's no point in putting an album out.
Yeah.
Like, but we need to stay relevant, so let's just like do what everyone else is doing and release a song or 2 songs or 3 songs over a few month period, you know.
Well, 2016, 17, and 18, Nine Inch Nails did the 3 EPs. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I know he kind of said, "Oh, Bad Witch is not an album," but it was 30 minutes and 5 tracks, just like the other ones. And it's like, it was more that connotation of EP meaning lesser.
Not to offend you, but that's where I fell off with them, to be honest. The last 3, I just didn't really think they were that great, but yeah, that's another thing.
So the best selling, although it didn't go to number 1, the best selling EP was released in 1991. Anyone want to take a shot at what it was?
How was it best selling and not number 1?
Because it sold at a low amount for a long time.
Okay.
All right. It was on the charts for a long time, like Bryan Adams or something.
Right. Except it wasn't Bryan Adams. It was Ugly Kid Joe.
What?
Yes.
Stop it. You're making this up.
So I don't know if you know this, but Everything About You, their big single, was not released on an album.
That's right.
It was released on the As Ugly as They Want to Be EP that came out in 1991. It is a multi-platinum release.
Oh my God.
Yep.
Okay.
And then the album America's Least Wanted came out in 1992, which they put it on that album as well.
Wow. Was that song like in a movie or something? Like what?
It must have been. I feel like it was.
It was because that's the year, if you remember, of Wayne's World, and it was in that movie.
Okay. And that's probably driving a lot of it.
Yep. It went to, so in the US, it only made it to number 52 on the US Billboard 200. But it charted everywhere. That was the year-end chart. It made it to number 4 at its highest point on the US Billboard 200. So it was 4 spots away from beating Alice Chains to the number 1. But it made it into the top 100 in Austria, Germany, New Zealand, Norway, Switzerland, the UK. That was a big single that drove that EP. So we've seen two big EP releases in the 90s. So let's talk about some other 90s EP releases that are significant in the story of the bands. You know, a lot of bands have released EPs and are not like that big a deal. Like maybe they throw a song on, they put a couple demos or a live track, and it's not that big a deal. But there are bands that have released EPs that have actually are important parts of their catalog as opposed to just an extended single. So let's go around and maybe like mention a couple of those that we're thinking of. Ian, I know you're chomping at the bit.
Oh yeah, well I've got 2. So obviously the first one is Nine Inch Nails Broken.
Yes.
And that. So I mean, after Pretty Hate Machine, huge tension between him and TVT Records. Him and Flood record this EP in various studios under various pseudonyms because they didn't want any label interference or claiming those songs. And then with this EP, he TVT and Aeroscope with Jimmy Iovine come to agreement. Trent was traded and got his Nothing Records imprint and that. But and obviously, I mean, this was a big album. I mean, you mentioned Ugly Kid Joe, but I imagine in terms of sales, this is probably one that follows in terms of overall sales, given how important this is. And obviously, it's further enhanced with the Broken movie and that's infamy around it. But then the second EP that I have, and surprisingly, this is an EP, is Marilyn Manson, Smells Like Children. I mean, it's surprising that it's an EP because it's 15 tracks and 53 minutes, but I mean, it was probably slapped at that title just for a sell point reason. And that may be something we can touch on later, but I mean, originally it was supposed to be a remix single for Dope Hat, but then this EP has various remixes on it, from Portrait of an American Family. It's got the cover versions, notably the Eurythmics' Sweet Dreams are made of this, but and some other original songs. But I mean, obviously, I mean, but this one is one we can probably come back later on EPs that kind of blur the line. But,
right.
The other note for this EP is also the first appearance studio-wise with Twiggy Ramirez, who would then have a huge influence on shaping the musical output of the band.
Right. So the Broken EP, just to go back for a second, that sold over 1 million copies in the US. It made it to, I think, number 5 in the US on the Billboard, or sorry, number 7 on the US Billboard 200. Made it to number 18 in the UK, number 49 in New Zealand, and it sold 100,000, which is platinum in Canada. Yeah. So again, this is very close to, you know, reaching the top 100 or the number 1 spot, I should say, on the Billboard 200 before Alice in Chains. So there were more than one EP. There was more than one EP that got real close to being a number 1 before Alice in Chains, which I did not know that.
Not to mention, Trent Reznor also got the Grammy with Wish on this EP as well for Best Metal Performance. And then,
that's right.
And then the other track from it, Happiness and Slavery, the live version from the Woodstock compilation, also won for Best Alternative Performance as well in '96. So, I mean, there's 2 things to hang around this album's neck right there.
Rich, EPs that are you think are significant from the 90s that you think are worth mentioning?
I was just going to say about Ian, because like the other day when I put it up on Patreon, he was like, "Why didn't you put Broken on there?"
You broke my heart, man. You broke my heart.
I thought it was too obvious. That's why I didn't put Jar of Flies either.
Yeah.
But
yeah, I thought you did list that one. That one was totally on my fault. That was totally my fault. I missed that you put Sap instead of Jar of Flies.
Yeah, I know. COVID brain. I blame it on that. But
you know what though? I think the Sap EP is just as good as the Jar. I mean, you put those two together, that's a great album.
Yeah. I bought it twice because eventually they released them both together. Because I bought the didn't they release it both together, or am I getting that wrong?
Not in the US that I'm aware of.
No, not North America.
Yeah, they did. I bought I think I bought it in '99 when I was in university. And there was like a 2-disc thing.
Huh.
So that must have been later on. Might have to double check that. A lot of alcohol was taken in university, so my mind. I've got like one of my favorite bands, Shiner. Obviously, everyone on Discord knows that. The Making Love EP.
Yes. With their excellent cover of Bad Company.
Yeah, like that. I love that so much. And the other one is a band no one really seems to know about, is Sprinkler, the Peerless EP.
No.
It's one of the like 100 million bands I put up on Discord. Sprinkler. So they were from like early 90s, so you'll have to check them out. But yeah, the EP, and then they released like a full-length debut after that. And that was amazing too. Between like 90 to 94. I've also got the Tea Party Alhambra, which is like acoustic kind of, it reminds me of Page and Plant Unleaded, but like the Tea Party.
That's an excellent one, and I enjoy the Reese Fulber remix he did of Sister Awake as well on that EP.
Yeah, like Tea Party, that's like ideal for them, that kind of acoustic sort of rock, like Zeppelin kind of folk kind of edge. And then the controversial one is the Chris Cornell Pontier.
How's that controversial?
Well,
Chris Cornell.
Basically, it was never released as an official release, was it? Because Jeff Ament helped with the songs, or had the names for the songs, and then Chris Cornell wrote the songs for singles off his ideas, but it was never released as an actual fully realized EP. It was put on the single soundtrack and then released like 3 years ago as on Record Store Day.
That's right.
Yeah. So I didn't know, I did put it up on there, but I thought, well, that was like, what, 2018? So that doesn't count, but the songs are from 91. So what do you think?
I did a quick check there in UK and Australia, because it charted. Jar and Fly and Sap were released as a 2-disc set.
There you go.
Right. So I wasn't imagining.
One of those bargain things you see every once in a while for artists, where it's like, here, 2 albums for the price of 1. Like, here's,
yeah, I got that. I got that in a record store near London, like half an hour from London, when I was in university in '99. When did you say it was released?
It says here 94, so
okay.
It had some legs under it by then.
Yeah. Those are some of mine anyway.
Yeah, I would double down a little bit on Alice in Chains, just to say, like, when you look at their catalog and just consider if they only released the 3 albums with Lane, that band doesn't quite make sense as like a big band. Like the 3rd album is very heavy, not accessible like commercially. Like, I know fans love it, but like not a bunch of radio songs on that album. The 1st album is a little weird. Like, obviously it had a big hit on it, and then Dirt is where all the hits are, but all the other hits are on EPs, which end up making up a lot of the Unplugged as well.
Right.
It's like you can't really tell the story of Alice in Chains without those 2 EPs.
They're
just so important to how people identify.
But all that stuff's so dark. like, but it was really popular. Like a lot of people were buying it, obviously.
Yeah.
But like those acoustic jams were like really accessible.
Yeah.
But they're like really dark. The 90s were weird though, weren't they? So obviously we know that. That's why we're here. So
yeah, like a song like No Excuses, which was big. It's dark, but it's got enough, it's bright enough that, can kind of pull radio listeners in. Also, like, it's cool, like SAP, I think, shows it's a good document in terms of how integral they were to Seattle's, with Ann Wilson singing on it and Chris Cornell singing on it and Mark Arm singing on it. And like, it just gives you in their catalog, a good sense of, how involved they were in that scene and how important those bands were to them. And it's got some of their best songs. It's also like great showcase for Jerry Cantrell at that point too, to have him sing quite a bit of leads and hear some, of his acoustic guitar playing. And so I haven't listened to him in a while. When I went back and visited him, I was really kind of taken in how good they are and just how important they were to their catalog.
But like, obviously, personally, I think it's a case of those two guys needing each other. Because even though I've loved the latest stuff, it just hasn't got that kind of magic, is it? But that also could be like from when I was growing up and it like hit me at a certain time. But in general, I do believe it has a certain magic to it. Jar of Flies.
Yep. Yeah, when they harmonize on that record with the quieter songs, it's unlike anything.
It elevates it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Another one I was thinking of in the same vein was At the Drive-Ins Via, which again it captures this important part in their evolution right before Relationship Command, when they get a lot more polished. And after Casino and Out, which they start to bring in, I think, a little bit more of the kind of Latin feel and layers, percussion. There's a little bit of electric piano on there. It's more melodic, but it still has that Casino in and Out like production. It feels a little rawer and not as slick as a Relationship of Command. It has some of my favorite songs of theirs on it as well.
Great album cover too.
Yeah.
With the boombox.
Super symbolic. Yeah. Easily recognizable. Like, I think they even use that a lot for t-shirts and stuff after the fact. So that's another one where that band is different. Their catalog is different if that EP is not in there.
Yeah.
What'd you have, Tim?
Well, there were a couple bands in the 90s that I think used EPs really well in terms of, here's where we can experiment a little bit. Here's where we can maybe try some ideas that don't work on the records. One of those is Radiohead. Radiohead had a number of great EPs in the 90s. I think you could probably compile a Cats and Dogs style compilation album in the way that Catherine Wheel did, which is just as strong as any of their records. And you could do that with Radiohead, because Radiohead, they got the first EP that came out, Drill, in 92. That's got 4 really good songs on it. The My Iron Lung EP is great. Again, you have a whole bunch of non-album tracks. And then you've got the Airbag How Am I Driving EP that comes out after the release of OK Computer. And that to me is like a completely like fully realized idea. There's weird stuff happening on there, but it carries the idea of what OK Computer was, and it like expands upon it and gets a little weirder. And I realize that it's just it's compiling singles essentially, or B-sides of singles from, other releases, like the No Surprises single and whatnot. But the way it's arranged, and I think also the packaging for that was really interesting. I don't know how many people actually bought it as opposed to just downloading it when in the 2000s, but like there's a lot of really interesting artwork in that EP. There's like short stories that the guy who created the artwork worked into the album artwork. So it was really interesting from an overall creative standpoint that they could take OK Computer and then expand upon it with this little EP that has some really cool songs like Palo Alto. There's a lot of stuff from Radiohead in the 90s that's not on albums that's really excellent. Some of my favorite Radiohead songs from that era are not on albums.
Yeah.
Another band that had an awesome run of EPs. Well, not awesome run, but they had it's a band that I like. But they had a number of cool EPs. Was the Afghan Wigs, starting with Uptown Avondale, which is the 5 soul covers that came out between. Is it between Congregation and Gentlemen? Is that when that came out?
Yeah.
And really like tuned you into, okay, this is a band that's taking songs from 30 years ago and reinterpreting them in a way that I think like Congregation sort of touched on with regards to the Jesus Christ Superstar cover, but really solidified. And they had done covers on singles and stuff like that, but this was really like a coordinated, thought out effort. And you would see that there's a Going to Town EP that would come out with Black Love. There's an EP that would come out for the 1965 era that includes like covers of Hole and the Miss World cover, which is a really interesting take on that song. But I like that band always used their EPs to reinterpret other people's material, along with, because there's not a lot of extra material from the Wigs. They're famously like, if they didn't really finish the song, they didn't record it. So you don't have a lot of like bonus songs that didn't get on the albums. They just didn't record the songs. That's just Dooley's thing. So they have all these cool covers on their EPs is, I think, what's fun about that band.
I would just to add on to that. I think if you're a person who doesn't quite get the Afghan Wigs, it's worth listening to that EP, because like you were saying, Tim, it just clues you into what the concept of the band is, what they're trying to achieve, like what the sound is going. And then when you listen into something like anything from Gentlemen forward, you start to hear things you probably wouldn't have heard before.
Right.
So if nothing else, even if you don't love the covers, I think some of the slower stuff is not great on there, but I think Come See About Me and Band of Gold in particular are really good. But if no other reason, if you're, have heard the band, interested in them, but it hasn't quite connected, you might want to listen to that EP, and it might help all the other pieces of the puzzle come into place.
Yeah, I've never really gotten, sorry to Marissa, by the way, because she's going to be offended, but I've never really quite got into the Wigs. I've tried, so I'll give that one a go, definitely. When was it released?
I want to say 91 or 92, somewhere in there.
Quite early, yeah. Okay, yeah, I'll give it a go.
Yeah, I got a mention from Willie. He wants to shout out Yellow Number 5 EP by Heat Miser. Not familiar with that. I mean, we've done Heat Miser, but I don't know that EP.
Well, that's the thing, is like there are a lot of bands, when I was researching this, like Stereolab put out EPs.
Yeah.
I love Stereolab. I have a lot of the albums, both on CD and vinyl, but I know that they've compiled a lot of those into compilations. So I haven't necessarily gone out and sought out individual EPs. Same with like Smashing Pumpkins. Like the Lull EP is fantastic. But I think some of those songs were included on the Pisces Iscariot compilation, right? So that's and honestly, Pisces Iscariot is like a great B-sides collection. Some of this, like Hello Kitty Cat and Starla and all these things, are just great songs, and you're like, and these are B-sides for this band.
That's my favorite Pumpkins album.
It's so good.
Yeah.
Yeah, for a long time I liked Pisces Iscariot as like my number 2 Smashing Pumpkins record. It's probably 2 or 3. I want to get to some of the list. Like Mike Bond gave us a list with some of which we've mentioned, but the ones that he didn't, I think, are important because it's a lot of UK stuff. So you got like My Bloody Valentine's Tremolo EP, Lush's Desire Lines Hypocrite EP, Slow Dive's Outside Your Room EP, Ride's Vapor Trail, Jesus and Mary Chain's Roller Coaster EP, the Manic Street Preachers' New Art Riot EP, which is an important one, I think, for all Mannix fans. You know, the very raw early years of the Mannix when they're sounding like kids playing Clash songs, essentially.
Totally.
But they also mentioned the Breeders' Safari EP, which is very good. Tanya Donnelly's Sliding and Diving. And then one I'm not familiar with is Uberman and the Shorely Wall EP. Does anybody know Uberman?
No.
No. Okay. Well, Mike, you'll have to explain that one in the Discord because we're not familiar with that. And then there were a couple that you didn't mention, Richard, that were on your list, but I think are we should bring up because I think these are, you know, a lot of times people don't know about these things. Like I didn't know that there was a Silverchair EP for Tomorrow. I just thought there was an album, but I'm guessing that was a pre-release before the record.
Yeah, and you can definitely tell the difference between that and Frog Stomp. I mean, Silverchair aren't one of my favorite bands by no means, but I'm like, I love all this stuff, so it just goes into the pot.
Yeah,
and you can like just tell like the difference in his voice and in the production because Kevin Shirley came on board, didn't he, for Frog Stomp? Yeah. So there's a big difference there. The lyrics as well, because like he must have been like 16, or 15 at the time of that EP. So, I mean, it's crazy. Yeah. What other ones did you pick up?
The Tool Opiate, which I was on board with Tool from that EP. I remember when that came out, and I don't know. Jay, did you get into the Tool with Undertow, or did you get the Opiate?
Undertow.
Okay.
Undertow.
So, I just remember like it just not sounding like anything, like or anything I'd ever heard. Not like anything, but it was like it was such a weird combination of like it rocked, but it was very small sounding in some ways because it was a musical 4-piece, but the lead singer doesn't play guitar, so you have like the one guitar. The bass wasn't really heavy, but it was doing interesting things, and you had this very percussive drummer, and it's
always been like Eastern tinged, influence, like And they recently did a re-release of the Opiate single, the song. I checked out on YouTube a few weeks ago. They've done a anniversary edition of that. So I don't know if you want to check that out.
Is it like a re-recording of it or the original?
Yeah, no, it's a re-recording.
Nice.
Sounds amazing.
I'm sure that they have over time evolved that song. Like, you know, artists when they're 20 years into their career can go back to an older song and be like, oh, well, now that we could mess around with this and maybe do it a little bit differently, or at least increase the fidelity of the recording.
Yeah. I love the idea of that for some bands that put out good material that was poorly recorded.
Especially in those like the 1990 to 92 time period.
Right.
Where it was just coming out, like Jay, you've mentioned it a few times, coming off the back end of the 80s into the early 90s, and you've still got that certain sound.
I would say most of the records that came out during that time we could just go ahead and redo all those.
I'm with you, man. Yeah, definitely.
One of the other EPs I wanted to mention is Beaster, which is a 1993 EP by Sugar, the Bob Mould band after Husker Du broke up, and while he was in between, you know, solo records, and then also Copper Blue had just come out, and it's a heavy record. It has like the noise of Husker Du, but you still get Bob's vocal. And JC Auto, and
I thought that was an album.
Well, it was released. No, it was I guess it was always a 1-disc 6-song release, but it's called an EP. Excuse me.
Yeah. I mean, the term EP is loose in the DMO world because you guys have EPs with like 8 songs on them. So.
Well, this it's only 30 minutes, so I think it qualifies still. But that's one I've always liked, and I think that I believe that got compiled into a whole B-sides album called B-sides, but B-E sides. That came out a couple years later. Because there were a lot of B-sides for that band. They only put out 2 records.
It was in between Copper Blue and File Under Easy Listening, wasn't it?
Right.
And those two were like a lot more poppy, even though they were like still had the Bob Mould sound. That one that you meant, yeah, that one sounded definitely darker, I think, or harsher.
Yep.
Wasn't as poppy.
Speaking of re-recording, a band out of Dayton, Ohio put out a lot of EPs in the 90s, and that's Guided by Voices. Basically, if they put out an album, there was probably 2 EPs released somewhere after. And a lot of those, I've tried to pick some of those up because I am a Guided by Voices fan, you know, starting with like Alien Lane's B1000, that era. And then, but man, some of those low fidelity recordings are just so hard to get through.
Yeah.
Like on, what's the one? It's like Trombone Fish Breakfast or something like that. I can't remember what the name of the EP is. That sounds like
Captain Beefheart.
It sounds like the Captain Beefheart album. Trombone Fish Breakfast.
I think that is an actual Captain Beefheart album. Or something like that. So Guided by Voices, there was a big chat on the Discord about them a couple of weeks ago. I've never got into them, but are they such a big thing for you guys because you grew up in Ohio, or local band thing? Or I don't know if you did grow up there, but I know
no. I mean, they are just like maybe in the US, how would you describe them? They're like the quintessential indie rock band. Like they're big enough that everybody knows who they are, but they're not so big that, you know, they've ever crossed the line where like they've alienated
so
people.
Still like them.
Yeah.
So
instead of hating them when they get too popular.
Right.
They have never gotten popular. Like even when Bob Mould sat down with Rick Ocasek and was like, we're going to make a pop record, it didn't break through. Like it made no dent. It made no difference in terms of their popularity. So he basically just does exactly what he wants, and people either love it or don't bother with it. But there's never been a moment where Guided by Voices was like, had that moment where they broke through.
Yeah.
Which is odd because he's such a good songwriter, but
all their stuff, earlier stuff, is like lo-fi, is it?
Oh yeah, the late 80s and into the mid 90s, it's so lo-fi.
Yeah,
I don't really enjoy
charming,
that.
Can't it? I find it charming and like it's good every now and then, but I just can't have it all the time, the lo-fi stuff. Like I need something with a bit of meat on the bones, you know, after a while.
And they are a constant touring band, right, Tim? I mean, they've always been playing clubs and just out there and available. So I think there's a live component too, that, and some of their live shows are notorious for being kind of just totally off the cuff, and you know, they play like way too many songs, and sometimes I think band members don't even know what the set list is going to be. Like Bob just like makes it up the night before. So
sounds like the Grateful Dead or something.
I think it has not that they're jammy, but it has that like live, you know, event kind of energy to it. It's a hang and a good time for people. So.
Yeah. So when you follow a band like that, they're like the most important thing in the world, but only a certain few people get it, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
On our YouTube live chat, first time I've ever said that aloud, Willie Dillon says the Archers of Loaf verse the Greatest of All Time EP that came out in 1994. It's a 5-song EP that was released after their debut Icky Metal, which we reviewed, and before VV, which came out in 95. I am not familiar with that EP. I haven't listened to it, but Robert Christou, the dean of rock journalists, gave it an A-. So it must be good because it's rock.
I don't think music should be rated with a grade, should it? Like A, B, C, D.
Don't they do that on Pitchfork though?
No, they do 1 to 10.
Oh, do they? Who does A? Who does letters? I know one of them does letters, don't they?
Is it All Music?
Could be.
No, All Music does a star rating.
All Music star.
Good
This
old
makes me think of
Steven.
school, which is not what rock and roll is about.
Exactly. Thank you.
Except the School of Rock.
Here's an EP that when I was revisiting sort of my catalog here that and now in hindsight seemed a bit odd for the time that made some waves was Danzig Thrall Demon Sweat Live, which at least in the States had his biggest radio song,
Mother,
the live version of Mother.
Yeah.
My impression of listening to that now was, how in the world was this on the radio? Like, it is not a great live performance. It feels like, oh, fans of Danzig would probably dig this, but like, this is the song that was played on the radio most by that band, and it is not a great vocal performance. The background singer sounds like a guy in the front row who's yelling along. Do you guys remember that? And like,
oh yeah,
thoughts on it?
It was confounding. I think there was something about former post-hardcore dudes who could shout one word like liar or mother, and turn them into anthems in the early 90s, because alternative rock was pretty much anybody who could sing was getting a deal.
But in a way, are you like, you can't be surprised though, can you? Because it was the 90s. Like, obviously that wouldn't happen now, would it? But like, we're looking back on it, you're thinking, well, how did that happen? But obviously a lot of stuff happened.
Yeah, it would be a Bandcamp EP and people wouldn't know about it.
Yeah.
And it's one of those weird EPs where it feels like a bunch of stuff thrown together. There's like 3 studio tracks that are not remarkable, and then 4 live songs. Why 4? Why put those together? Like, it doesn't seem to make any sense. It was like a grab bag of stuff to sell.
Glenn Danzig was a name, wasn't he, though? So they would have been we'll put it out. Yeah. But like, that's what happened. So it's just,
and the live tracks aren't even like the singles from the previous albums, which, you know, at least on like Headbangers Ball, and you know, they had some MTV play and they were known. It's not even any of those songs. It's a bunch of other songs.
With a guy shouting
very
in the
odd.
front row.
And had that been released and not made any waves, I'd be like, okay, yeah, this is a weird thing to do and nobody cared. But like, I'm guessing this is his best-selling album.
Not only is it like best-selling, but like, people who don't know anything about the Misfits or Glenn Danzig know that song.
Yeah.
Because that Mother is so iconic. Yeah. It's like, woohoo! You know what I mean?
Yeah. They could play it at stadiums.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I do have a couple other EPs to mention. Although these aren't ones that are going to be well known, but definitely shaped the band. But the Chemical Brothers, before their first album, released a couple of EPs under the Dust Brothers pseudonym. And of course, then they came over here. The production team took them to Objection. Of course, their first album was Exit from Planet Dust.
Right.
But I mean, the EPs, I mean, it's not going to match that album or Dig Your Own Hole, but I mean, it definitely influenced the band, because I mean, it was part of their rise, and of course then shaped what followed. And I mean, but of course, I mean, it was part of that culture. I mean, there's a lot of electronic and underground music, I mean, EPs floating around, and weren't necessarily big, but I mean, like, it was a sign of bigger things to come.
Yeah, for a few years that scene was massive here. I can't believe that was 1997. Like, that's one of those albums, I think it
was 96, Dig Your Own Hole.
96. Yeah, it feels like it was later though. It's just one of those albums you think that didn't come out then, but it did.
Yeah. Just I think probably because it really got its legs in 97, when you had other stuff kept coming out at that time as well, like Daft Punk. With that scene, Underworld keeps going up, and I mean, like, it all comes to a head in 97, but some stuff was released in 96.
Did Air have some EPs around that time too?
I'm trying to think.
I'm not familiar with Air. I do know, and maybe this is under your or on your list, Ian, is Aphex Twin, Come to Daddy. Wasn't that an EP?
I'd have to check. I don't have that release. So.
I feel like that was the I need to check that because
Yeah, I'll check right
they
now.
were one of those bands, and they still are, that just you never know what's coming in terms of, is it going to be an album? Is it going to be an EP that each song is 10 minutes? Or
Or
is
a
it going
double
to
album.
or a double album and there's going to be no song titles? Or, you know what I mean? Like there's always some like wacky, not wacky, but you just don't know what's going to happen with regards to
Yeah.
what's released. So let's see.
Yeah, he's
It's
got
like-
he's got a
it's like
shitload of
Yeah, it's like 10 EPs.
but I mean, I can't think. What was the one that you mentioned?
So
yes,
Come to Daddy came out in
yeah,
97, and
yeah.
that was the single that, like,
Yeah.
because of electronica, it kind of snuck in with that electronica crowd, even though he's totally not in that same ballpark.
No.
But I just remember
Yeah.
being totally like, what the hell am I listening to? It was the same thing when I heard like from there you go down this rabbit hole of like, oh, I'm gonna slaughter this name, but Autechre, is that how you say the name?
Oh, attacker.
Right. So somebody's like, well, if you like Aphex Twin, you should check out Autechre. And I was like, okay. And then I'm like, what? I don't understand what's happening at all. This does not sound like it's from the same planet that I'm from.
The artwork as well is really creepy with his face.
Oh yeah, that was how the video was. It was his face on like women in bikinis.
All this face, like,
yes,
like a bad nightmare, isn't it? It's like you turn around and everyone's got the same face.
Yeah, he knew how to
visuals is good visuals.
Yeah, in the same way that Trent Reznor is so good at the visual aspect.
Yeah.
Richard D. James definitely does. But then, like, so you look through the release titles, like Donkey Rhubarb. Like, what? Just pick two words out of the dictionary.
Yeah. Just put his finger on the book and just pick the number.
Analog Bubble Bath.
Yeah.
I just
Yeah, it's
don't know.
not an EP, but the ambient record from '92 he did was like one of the best ambient records.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have the selected ambient works 85 to 92 and the follow-up one as well.
Those are like classic
Yeah.
records. That I end up on like lists, you know, of the top 500 albums of all time and that kind of stuff on Rolling Stone. So it's just interesting that EP produced, that went to number 36 in the UK, 37 in the US, 10 in Denmark. That single is the only single that's charted in the US for Aphex Twin.
I've got a couple here, like the hark back to previous episodes. So I've got the Plexi EP.
Yeah,
because that first Plexi album I discovered through the podcast.
Yep.
And listening to those interviews all those years back.
Our very long and rambling interview with the guys from Plexi,
man,
in which one of them checks out during the middle of the interview. He's like, I gotta go, guys.
That was like Nixon Frost. That was one of the. That was amazing. I loved that. But that was like near to the time I discovered the podcast. And then it was like this album I'd never heard of. And then I absolutely love it. And I got to listen to an interview with these people I didn't even know either that were involved in the album. That's cool. What it's all about, isn't it? That's the whole thing.
It is, absolutely.
And then there was Creepy EP, Into Another. You've had Into Another on.
Yep.
And then like a name that I thought was made up, Smack Melon. Do you remember when someone like put that up on Discord? Yep. And I think you, Jay, you were like, that's a made up name.
Right. That can't be real.
But it was. And yeah, the EP and the album are both amazing too. So
excellent.
Yeah.
Well, let's go. We've covered a lot of EPs in here. Let's talk about, let's maybe wrap up since we're hitting the hour mark. Our favorite EPs of the 90s. If you want to pick one you've already mentioned, that's fine. If you want to pick something new or unexpected, go ahead. I have one that I have not mentioned that I waited for this moment
Well, don't make us wait any longer, for God's sake.
Yeah, go ahead. Drum
What
roll.
is it?
All right. My favorite EP of the 90s is Golden Smogs on Golden Smog.
Oh.
This was the first release from the Minneapolis supergroup, which at the time consisted of Dave Pirner of Soul Asylum, Jim Boquist, who played in Sunvolt, Martin Zillar of a band called the Gear Daddies, and then they added Chris Mars, who played in the Replacements, Gary Loris of the Jayhawks, and a guy named Craig Johnson from Run West You Run. Now, other people would come and play on the records, but they wouldn't necessarily be in the whole band. Jody Stevens of Big Star played with the band for a while. Jeff Tweedy of a band called Wilco, which you may be familiar with, he played with the band for a couple records. And they actually have gotten together and done reunion shows recently. And it's basically just a cover band of a bunch of famous musicians from Minneapolis, Chicago, that kind of like Midwestern area, that would get together in a bar and just play fun covers together away from their main bands. So the first EP that came out, which was in 1992, it covers Easy to Be Hard, which is from the musical Hair, Shooting Star by Bad Company, which is sung by Dave Pirner, Backstreet Girl by the Rolling Stones, a song called Sun, We've Kept the Room Just the Way You Like It by an artist called Michelangelo. And then it closes with a cover of the song Cowboy Song by Thin Lizzy, but it's sung by their roadie, Bill Sullivan.
That's who should sing it for sure. That's a roadie song if I've ever heard.
I mean, it's perfect because it's like a little. The whole EP is like a little sloppy, like a bar band. Yeah. But you've got all these great players who can pull off all the parts exactly the way they're supposed to be played. Mm-hmm. And it just sounds fun. And I got to see them when they toured their first record, and it was like seeing the best cover band who were all drinking Rolling Rocks, pounding Rolling Rocks the whole time, getting drunker and drunker throughout the set, doing more and more fun covers. So
was it rocking? Like, was it like alt countryfied, or
it's got a little Americana country, but it's also like Bad Company. So it's got that like rock edge.
That's good. Yeah.
And they would go on to make full length albums that were original, mostly original songs. They did cover a few songs. Like on the first album, they cover a Ronnie Lane song called Glad and Sorry. And then they covered, I think it's an old country song called She Don't Have to See You. But for the most part, it's originals.
This album, Weird Tales, is really highly rated.
Yeah, I like the first record a little bit more than Weird Tales, but the production on Weird Tales is a little bit better because you could tell like, oh shit, Wilco kind of was starting to blow up. Yeah. The Jayhawks sort of had a built-in audience. Soul Asylum had not blown up when the On Golden Pond EP was released. It was just after that the Grave Dancers Union blew up. Yeah. So like then people started paying attention to them. Yeah. So, and then they, after Down by the Old Mainstream in 95 and then Weird Tales in 98, they stopped playing for almost 10 years. But it was just a lot of fun, and I just love that EP. It captures a very specific like moment and sound, and it's relaxed but fun, and I don't know. So that's my favorite EP of the 90s. Ian, what's one that you got that you really enjoy?
Well, I mean, obviously, I've mentioned the Nails one already. Right. I've mentioned on the Discord and before that's my favorite Nails release. So the other EP that I can think of is, unfortunately, it was never released. But there are test pressings. Is Frontline Assembly, the Toxic EP, which comes between 1990's Caustic Grip and 92's Tactical Neural Implant album. So a lot of the tracks have been released as B-sides for the Tactical Neural Implant singles and other compilations that would follow. So that but that is definitely one that's on my wish list, but I don't feel like spending $400 US on. Since all the tracks are available. Other wish list EPs is Coil. In '98, they did 4 EPs for the Equinox and Solstice, and it was later compiled on Moon's Milk and that. But those EPs, but Coil releases, I mean, I'll apply my previous comment about $400 US, and that the original Coil pressings are very pricey and rare to find, and questionable reissues afterwards for that band too.
Frontline Assembly, I've given a chance because you like recommended them like ages ago.
Yeah,
so
they're my favorite industrial groups. So that's
are they?
Yeah.
So, but like I thought Nine Inch Nails were your favorite, or do you not count them as industrial?
Even if I did, they're just slightly below.
Oh, really? Okay.
So
yeah, Frontline Assembly. I caught some of their live stuff on YouTube, and the guy is like a really good showman. They're like,
oh yeah,
really good. So thanks for that, because I didn't know anything about them.
Yeah, no problem.
Rich, what's an EP that you would count among your favorites?
Like apart from the ones I've mentioned, maybe maybe Summer Camp Tonight or Shades Apart, Do Danger.
Nice.
But, yeah, they're not for everyone. Let's just say that. Yeah, they're not like their most famous releases from those bands, obviously, because like Summer Camp had that one big album. You guys have done that before anyway.
Yeah. Is the EP before that or after it?
Yeah, no, it's before that.
Okay. I'm
pretty sure, yeah. And then Do Danger is like really, really early Shades Apart. Because obviously you did the Eyewitness album.
Mm-hmm.
And that is like light years away from that.
Interesting.
Do Danger isn't like lo-fi, but it's like punk rock, like low production style-y, you know?
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I was really happy that you liked Eyewitness, Jay. when I was listening to that episode, I was like, oh man, I can't believe I wasn't sure you'd like it, but yeah, I was really happy about that. But yeah, those two definitely. And then that pretty much sums up my whole list off Patreon.
That covers your list.
Yeah.
Jay, any other EPs you want to mention?
We covered my 4 of my top 5. The only one we didn't cover was Spoon Soft Effects. And just personally, like that era of the band, I just love so much. And it's just more of that material. So it's got that, super reverbed out amp sound with the pan drums and like that weird production, kind of lo-fi, almost like dual mono production that they had in that era. It gives you a little glimpse of maybe where the band's going to go in a short track called I Could See the Dude, which is a little bit mellower, more groove oriented, a little layered. So you can start to see like where this band can go. And it just fills out for me an era of a band that like they'll never be able to recapture as they continue to progress through their career. They get more and more polished, and the production values go up, and there's only really 2 albums and then this EP that just really sound this way. So I like that EP quite a bit. And the only one I had listed that was interesting to me was Dream Theater put out an EP in the 90s that had a 23-minute long song plus like 4 or 5 live songs. So it ended up being 58 minutes. I'm like, in what world is this an EP? I don't understand.
They could do that.
Right. I think it was like they had this song that they had started years ago. They recorded it and they're like, well, shit, we can't put out a single. Like that doesn't make any sense in the 90s for a prog rock band to put out a single. So let's throw some live tracks on here, which the live tracks are all covers. So to hear musicians that are that good cover like Deep Purple, Perfect Strangers, they do a pretty awesome job of covering that song. So the covers are fun. And I think it's a, classic sounding 23-minute long, Dream Theater track, but it's also just, I think, a good example of what the hell is an EP in the 90s coming in at 58 minutes.
Right, exactly.
What's the production like on that though? Does it sound like really thin?
No, it sounds good. The drum sound is a little different. Like I think he's starting to hear like the new metal sounds, and he's using like that trash can snare. So like the production's a little different than the other stuff they did in the 90s, but
Not
the live
dated.
tracks sound great.
Not dated.
No, I don't think so.
I find a lot of this stuff sounds a bit dated now. The early 90s stuff.
Yeah. Probably because the keyboards too.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
Those keyboards.
Yep.
Always dating you.
Yeah.
All right. Well, gents, Rich, Ian, thank you so much for stopping by on this Saturday afternoon and talking EPs. I don't know that we really settled anything about finding out what an EP actually is, because if anything, we've just left it more confused than...
They were like an excuse to put out like leftover B-sides. They were an excuse to release singles. They were sometimes like moments in time between records where artists were actually inspired. It's like, you name it, there was, it was just another way to put music.
If you really love a band or like some music, then you're just happy to get anything though, aren't you?
Yeah.
Right.
So,
here's the important question. Did you prefer when you got your EP that it come in a full-size CD case in the 90s, or did you like the little thin slip case that they would release some EPs in?
It depended when. I like the slip. I like the slip cases in concept, but then when you go to put them in your organizer, they sometimes wouldn't work right.
What do you mean? Yeah, it's got like the Vitology effect, doesn't it? Where it doesn't fit in with all the others.
It's always sitting on the top by itself.
Yeah,
Or Cool's
I'll never
10,000
get over
days.
that, man.
Yeah. Whenever there's an oddly shaped, you're like, God damn it. Like, these things are all perfectly in line, and there's one sticking up weird.
There it is, Vitology every time, man.
Oh, well, every time.
Vitology and Tool's 10,000 days. Those are the two for me.
Yes.
It's probably also worth noting, like in the 90s, this would have been a business tactic, because if it's cataloged as an EP, I assume you're selling it for less.
Yeah, like I said that with Manson, Smell Like Children. That was definitely the case with that one.
Yeah.
So it kind of can get you to maybe an audience that's not going to spend, $20, but will spend $8.
Right.
It's maybe a way to get your music in their hands too.
The slip cases, you talking about like the little plastic fold?
The real thin plastic ones. I mean, then you had the Digipacks, which were the cardboard ones.
Yeah.
Which we could just do a whole show on 90s CD packaging differences.
At least you can recycle the cardboard ones, though, I guess, maybe.
Right.
I've got a lot of the thin cases for singles, so I more identify those thin cases with singles than EPs.
You just know that there's someone out there that collects all those little plastic things, don't you?
Oh yeah, there are
in the world. Like they've got like millions of these little plastic.
I assume that there's a guy out there that has an example of every possible CD case. Like Ryko Disc had those colored discs that were like green, and some of them had like little ridges along the edge that had like a little bit of texture, and some of them, and then you get into like the double discs. Did they open like this, or how did they fold open? Those always the little plastic pieces that held the disc in place would always break.
Yeah.
You thought we were nerds. No, those guys who do that are the nerds.
Exactly. Speaking of nerds, if you'd like to join us at Patreon, you can do so by going to digmeoutunion.com or dmounion.com. That's where you join the union. You can vote. You can submit suggestions. You can give us some lip. It's all right. That's all. It's all good at Patreon. It's also where you can read the box newsletter that's released every week, which you can sign up for at digmeoutpodcast.com. It's a newsletter of new releases from 80s and 90s relevant artists, music, books, movies, TV shows, whatever. We cover it every week, plus reviews, sometimes submitted by our patrons, such as Ian, who thankfully covers the electronic music that I don't know.
I'm now on week 4 if you include the one I submitted this week.
Yes.
I'll have soft sell for you next week.
I already did soft sell.
Oh, okay.
It's coming out this week. However, However, there was a release recently that I was surprised that you need to check out Archive.
Okay.
That's what it was. I thought that would be in your wheelhouse.
Okay.
Check out the band Archive, UK electronic band.
Okay. Send me. I'll talk to you after. I'll get the link.
Okay. So, Ian submits for music that he enjoys. Eric Peterson has suggested or submitted stuff like the Helicopters recently. Gavin down in Australia has covered stuff. We've had people from all over. Kyle covering some stuff for us. So I always like it when we get other opinions and thoughts, because I don't have an opinion or thought on everything, even though the internet tells me I should have an opinion or thought on everything and I must express it at all times.
Well,
sometimes
I'm
I don't.
happy to defer the opinion of DMO on industrial music to Ian.
Yes, exactly.
So
well, it's what's funny is that we've been doing this a long time. We've covered a lot of music. There are still so many holes. And when Ian can provide a review that has some sort of historical perspective on electronic music that I don't have, it's such a much better review, because I'm just like, there's bleeps and bloops. What else can I tell you?
Yeah, there's marginal value to that. I don't know anything about this. This is what I think, which is
right.
Not seriously deep sometimes.
Yes, exactly.
First, here's some context.
We all appreciate all the stuff that Ian sends over as well, because sometimes like people don't respond, but you're just constantly like putting stuff up on the industrial channel, and I just wanted to like say we appreciate it.
Yes,
I found stuff on there, so keep it up, man. It's good work.
Yeah, work's been crazy the past month, so I've been slacking a bit, but now
I didn't want to say that,
but and he's talking about our Discord, which you get when you sign up for Patreon. You get a Discord community that talks about music every day, and always learning new stuff there from all the folks all around the world. It's great. And lastly, not lastly, sorry. If you'd like to suggest an album for us to check out, go to digmeoutpodcast.com and suggest an album at our suggest an album page. And then lastly, Apple Podcast is where you go to leave positive feedback for us. For Jay, I'm Tim. We're out. We'll be back next week with another episode of Dig Me Out.